All right. Hello, welcome everyone to this month's wildfire. Whoops, let me get this up here. There we go. There you go. There I am. All right, welcome everyone to this month's Wildfire Safety Education Forum presented by the Greater Auburn Area Fire Safe Council. The mission of the council is to promote fire safe practices within the community through outreach, education, and program development, and identify ways to protect the community from wildfire. We serve the communities of Bowman, Penryn, Newcastle, as well as the city of Auburn. My name is Rob Kislev, and I serve on the council, and I'll be the host for today's session. Our speaker today is Kevin Marini, manager of the Placer, Nevada County's Master Gardener Program, which is part of the University of California Cooperative Extension Program. Kevin will be speaking to us on how we can incorporate Firewise and defensible space concepts into our home landscaping. If you have any questions, please include them in the Q&A field or the comments section, and we'll make sure that they're addressed at the end of the session. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob, for having me, for inviting me to even do this. This is wonderful. And like you said, this will be recorded, right? So yes. Hopefully both of us can pass this on after this talk. So
absolutely.
Let me share my screen to get my presentation up. All right, everyone hopefully can see that and hear me.
Yes.
All right, so my name is Kevin Marini, and I've been managing the Master Gardener volunteer programs here in Placer County and in Nevada County for 20 years now. And after all of this time, and it's been a wonderful career, I am hoping to kind of switch gears here in the near future to focus solely on Firewise, firescaping, Firewise landscaping. We'll talk about all the different terms in a second. And so, you know, I feel like I'm kind of uniquely qualified after all these years to help people with their landscape preparations. I've, probably diagnosed more plant problems than anyone in Placer County over the last 20 years. It's been one of the big features of my job. I'm also a certified arborist, so I know quite a bit about, plants all the way up to trees. And so I think that I can take this knowledge and experience over the last 20 years and kind of apply it to kind of this new normal we're dealing with right now in our environment. So that's kind of the intro, some background about me. And now we're going to just start and jump into firescaping. And I'll define that in 1 second as long as this works. Let's see. Maybe I have to, it's not forwarding for some reason. There we go. Okay, so firescaping is kind of an interesting newer term to describe how to arrange plants in a landscape so that you slow the spread of fire potentially coming towards your house, right? So the official kind of definition that I found from the dictionary is to arrange the features of a garden or other areas of land in a way that inhibits or interrupts the spread of fire. And so there's so many different terms out there that basically refer to the same exact definition. So as you can see on the right here, I've brought a bunch of them. I put a bunch of them down: Firewise, Fire Smart, Fire Resilient, Fireproof, Fire Resistant, Fire Safe. All of these terms are used pretty much interchangeably in this realm. And so the one term that right off the bat we should kind of talk about is this idea of fireproofing your house / landscape. That is one that I tend to move away from, because it gives the impression that you can create a landscape where things do not burn, and that's just not really true. All plants burn eventually, some faster than others, and we'll get to that. But that's the one term I think probably should be discarded. But other than that, I think all of these other terms being used kind of interchangeably with fire escaping is fine by me. And they all basically, like I said, are synonymous in that it's an arrangement of the features of a garden or landscape, also the maintenance of said landscape to slow the spread of fire and to hopefully save your house from catching on fire. So let's move on after that. So why is fire escaping something that needs our attention? This is, probably pretty self-explanatory if you live in Placer County. I mean, we just had a very large fire, the mosquito fire, very recently, so it's in the front of everyone's mind. And especially in this late season time, people tend to be thinking about fire when we haven't had a lot of rain. So the traditional way of landscaping around a home tended to be to place trees and shrubs around the home, very close to the home. These are sometimes called foundational plantings, right? Like literally around the foundation. And so there's a kind of this traditional way of landscaping that now is at odds with what we want to see in our landscapes to help slow the spread of fire. So there is a true need to kind of recalibrate our landscapes and to go away from more of the traditional style to a different style that's going to be more resource efficient in one respect and also help us with being more resilient to fire. So as you can see in these pictures, large shrubs up against the house, trees up against the house, packed together, using plants that aren't necessarily preferable. And one of the very common pruning methods that people use in traditional landscape foundational plantings is to hedge shrubs and perennials and woody perennials, and in some cases even small trees. And so hedging is one of those pruning styles that we really need to move away from. And I'll explain that further as I move on. Another reason why this is, warrants our attention is because we live in a very high fire hazard zone. Most of Placer County falls into a high fire hazard zone. So it's super important to not only pay attention to our landscapes, but also be aware of the greater surroundings of where we live and how essential it is to really be intentional for managing our landscapes. Okay, so what is defensible space? Well, most people are aware of the term defensible space. I actually have this little blurb from CAL FIRE that I like to read real quick because I think it's really well done. Defensible space is the buffer you create between a building on your property and the grass, trees, shrubs, or any wildland area that surround it. This space is needed to slow or stop the spread of wildfire, and it helps protect your home from catching fire, either from embers, direct flame contact, or radiant heat. Proper defensible space also provides firefighters a safe area to work in to defend your home. And I would actually say that's the most important part, because it's very rare that you could create a landscape that will completely prevent fire from visiting your home. As we know, embers can fall on our home and completely bypass a landscape. So the most important concept of defensible space is that you're creating an environment around your home that is able to be defended by firefighters, hopefully. So this, falls into, your driveway and road access and clearing along roads and ingress and egress factors, which I'm not going to talk too much about today. But just be aware that defensible space contains all of that, okay? I'm focused in on the defensible space from your home outward. So there is an actual, Public Resources Code 4291, which is, basically dictates that California residents need to abide by certain vegetation management requirements. And so know that this is serious business. This is not just recommendation, this is the law. And so everyone should pay attention to this and make every effort possible to create and maintain defensible space. Let's go to the next slide. So that Public Resources Code 4291 is statewide, but many counties in California have enacted their own local ordinances, which in many cases take the 4291 requirements and actually create more requirements or more strict requirements. And so it's super important that if you live in Placer County, that you're familiar with our Placer County ordinance, right? So you can look this up online. This is obviously just a snapshot of a part of it. But it's called the Hazardous Vegetation and Combustible Material Abatement Ordinance. So you should be able to find this quite easily. And I think it's important to not only familiarize yourself with the state requirements, but the local ones, because this is what we need to be paying attention here in Placer County. Of course, Placer County stretches from Lincoln all the way up, to the mountains. So geographically, it's incredibly diverse. And so obviously, a lot of these requirements are variable depending on where you live in the whole county. And so, if you live somewhere where you don't even have 10 feet from your house to the next house, maybe the 100-foot defensible space doesn't really apply there, right? So you have to take this information and take these requirements and apply them to where you're living in Placer County and make them work for you. So real quickly, I wanted to differentiate between home hardening and defensible space in the landscape. So today I'm focused on from the home outward, but of course, home hardening, the idea of creating a home that is resistant to catching on fire, is crucial. So just because I'm not going to talk about roof materials and window materials and screening vents and things like that does not mean that isn't extremely important. And our CAL FIRE folks that go out and help people create, they have more experience than I do and more knowledge than I do as far as the home hardening aspect. I'm a plant person, I'm a tree person, so that's where my expertise lies, in finding the right plant for the right place and explaining how to maintain that plant and also how to group plants together. So how does fire reach our homes? In general, 3 different ways: direct flame contact. You'll see the little graphic here on the left, direct flame contact. That is where defensible space in our landscape can really help us, trying to interrupt or slow the spread of that path of fire towards the house, those direct flames. Now, embers are the big one. Okay, so the overwhelming majority of house fires, occur because of embers being blown in by the wind and landing close to or on our homes. And so, definitely, we're going to talk about how important that first, 5 feet from your home out towards your landscape is. And embers are just really, really challenging to deal with, especially in a high wind fire, right? And then there's radiant heat, which not a lot of people think about, that you could have something close to your home that catches on fire and that isn't necessarily bringing flames or embers right to your home, but can create such high heat that can catch combustible materials around your home or on your home on fire. And so these are the 3 ways we're trying to mitigate here, okay? And I'm not saying each one of these is equally important or equally destructive. They're all kind of different and depends on the environment you live in and the weather conditions at the time and what effort you've put in to make your home hardened and to create and maintain defensible space. So by far, the most important thing to pay attention to around your home is zone 0. The area from 0 to 5 feet out from your home. All the data supports paying the most attention to this zone. This is where, if you have flammable, combustible material and embers fall into this area, your house is likely to catch on fire, okay? So take a measuring tape and put it out to 5 feet and walk around your home and make sure you understand what you have in that 5-foot area around your home and ask yourself, is this combustible? Is this flammable, right? So this zone has kind of been called the ember ignition zone. So the focus, of course, is on keeping embers that fall into this zone from catching your whole house on fire or an attached wood deck or whatever. And so even though people focus on a lot of the vegetation outside of this zone, I can honestly say, after reviewing so much data on defensible space, that this is the crucial zone. So if you do nothing else, which I hope you do, but if you didn't do anything else, this 0 to 5 feet is crucial. So we learned in a couple fires really, but the Tubbs fire really hit home, where the majority of these of houses burning down are from these wind-driven ember cast fires. And so there are now many examples of intact landscapes around homes that have burned to the ground. Okay, and so the Tubbs fire, this happened. This was widespread, where trees right around homes didn't burn down, but homes did. And I teach a lot in Butte County, and I had some master gardener volunteers going through a training class that I was teaching, and all 5 of them in this class said that their landscapes in the campfire up in Paradise also left intact, yet their houses burned to the ground. So this is a reality that we need to pay attention to. I'm not trying to take away the attention from our vegetation management. I'm just emphasizing the importance of that ember ignition zone and how these embers seem to be able to cross large distances and come from miles away to catch our homes on fire, regardless of what our vegetation management situation is. So it's something that we have to square with, and that's why that home hardening and that ember ignition zone is just so crucial. So I'm not just talking about vegetation, of course, when I'm looking at this 0 to 5 foot, this zone 0, okay? Of course, around your home, you want to keep anything that can burn out of there. So, in general, you don't want to use any organic mulches up against your home. Gravel material, decomposed granite material, like this pathway material here in the picture on the left, that's kind of what you want. And if you're going to have any vegetation, it should be low growing and lush, without any dead material on it. So no dead vegetation, no organic mulches in the 0 to 5 range. And, you've got to start looking around at wooden decks, outdoor furniture. Is it made of old, redwood that's gonna catch fire? Propane tanks shouldn't be anywhere near your home. Wood piles. A lot of people will, have wood piles on their front porch. Again, that's not recommended anymore. Sheds, other structures close to your home. Look at that. And believe it or not, even recycling and garbage cans being up against the home is no longer recommended. Some recycling bins are just bins that are open on the top, filled with cardboard and newspaper. So you can imagine if embers fall into that, you're in a world of hurt. So I'm not just talking about vegetation in this 0 to 5 range. I'm talking about anything that's combustible and flammable needs to be removed, or at least you need to be cognizant of it, right? So there may be times of year where it's full on winter and we've gotten some soaking rains, and you can bring some wood up to your porch to feed your fire. Don't get me wrong, obviously there's some you have to be reasonable with these things, but in general, in fire season, in the dry season, you have to look beyond just vegetation in that ember ignition zone. Okay, so let's move to zone 1, which is from that 5 foot ember ignition zone out to 30 feet. This is termed the lean, clean, and green zone. The mantra here is maintenance, 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 maintenance. The most important thing is to maintain this area out 30 feet from your home to be free of dead vegetation. Okay, so this is where understanding how to maintain plants in the correct way to keep them healthy and growing lush. but also keeping them free of dead material. So doing the deadheading, doing the pruning out of dead, dying, diseased parts of the plants. And then, of course, this is a good area to have some irrigated lawn. We're a lot of these landscape concepts are at odds these days. We're in a drought, so we're supposed to hold back the water, yet having an irrigated turf area in this lean, clean, and green zone is a really good idea. So you have to weigh some of these things and see what makes the most sense. There are some new native sods that are getting really popular, that are low water turf grass species, but they're actually being propagated and sold as sod. So they're very easy to install and get established, and they're low water once they are established. So here you're trying to maintain, plants in a very healthy manner. You bring in some irrigated turf to potentially be a buffer. And then, of course, you're arranging plants in such a way where there's not just a constant path. So let's talk a little bit more about that. You want to maintain horizontal and vertical spacing between well-maintained plants. That's the key with this 5 to 30 foot zone. Now, hardscape can be a part of that. You see the picture on the left, the use of rock around an island of planting, which gives horizontal spacing between that cluster of plantings and the next ones over, right? So the idea of planting in islands is a good thing to have in your head. You can group plants together, but make sure those groupings have horizontal space between them. This also relates to, perennials, to shrubs, to trees, right? You want horizontal space as well as vertical space between them. You'll see the picture on the right. The use of retaining walls can be very helpful. Flagstone patios, any hardscape that's going to also interrupt that path of fire can be crucial in this zone. Okay, so you see irrigated turf here, you see plants and groupings, well maintained, you see a retaining wall, which would be a little boundary for that fire to hit up against. So maintaining horizontal and vertical spacing. When you're maintaining vertical spacing, there's a specific term called fire ladders. So let's talk about that next. What you see in this graphic on the left here is on the very top is the example of a fire ladder. So you see a small shrub under a small tree under a larger tree grouped close together. So if you start looking around your landscape, you want to try to identify these fire ladders where small plants are next to medium plants, are next to large plants, and provide a clear path right up into the canopy of trees. That is what you need to eliminate vertically. So limbing up trees, taking out that shrub, the middleman, if you will, removing it, right? So I'm not just talking about horizontal spacing, we're talking about vertical spacing. You can see on the graphic on the left, on the right there, the difference between a home that's just, dense with fire ladders and then a landscape that has spacing involved in it. And so this is, again, take that measuring tape out and from 5 to 30 feet, walk around your home. You'll be quite shocked, I think, about how far that goes out. So this, again, lean, clean, and green zone. Okay, so let's move on to zone 2, which is that 30 feet all the way out to 100 feet. Now, remember what I said earlier, which was if you live in a suburban area of Placer County, you may not have 30 to 100 feet. Your yard may simply be from your house to 30 feet out, and that's it. And so you have to kind of take these concepts and apply them to a smaller yard, right? And really, probably put most of your emphasis on the home hardening aspect, because even houses close together kind of provide that horizontal clumping that allows a house to catch on fire, spew embers to the next one, and it just bypasses the whole landscape. It just goes house to house to house. So again, you've got to think about those home hardening aspects too. Okay, so if you do have a larger piece of acreage, or you have a large lot, the 30 to 100 feet is called the fuel reduction zone. And so in this area, you're still maintaining plants and trees and shrubs free of dead, dying, and diseased material. So, the rule of thumb from your house all the way out to the 100-foot defensible space zone is keep it free of dried out, dead vegetation, and try to identify diseased and dying parts and keep that maintained. Because the more we have healthy plants, the more they will be resilient to the spreading of fire. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more. So in this zone, this is where, especially in our WUI areas, WUI, wildland urban interfaces, this can be a crucial zone, because this is where fires can potentially crawl up into trees and create embers being shot out the top. And so as much as we can, we want to try to keep fires moving through this zone on the ground instead of getting up into the trees, okay? However, it does not mean that you need to remove all the trees and all the shrubs and all the understory plants. In fact, there's really nothing in 4291 that says you have to remove any trees, except maybe limbs that are over your house, or trees that are too close to your home. But in this fuel reduction zone, you're looking for, again, horizontal and vertical spacing. But if you remove all the young trees, all the shrubs, and all the understory stuff, and you're left with just a mature tree type park-like property, which people are thinking is a really good thing. The problem with that is that there's consequences to that environmentally, and even for fire, believe it or not. So let's talk more about that. So if you indiscriminately, meaning that you just hire someone to come in and you say, leave some mature oaks and pines. Well, this is a neighbor of mine that spent a lot of money on 4 or 5 acres of their land, clearing it all. And it didn't take more than, the next 6 months, the next spring, for it to explode in French broom. And so what happens when you clear an area is you create an opportunity for a new plant to move in, right? So it's not like the clearing is just step one. You then have to maintain and manage everything that you cleared, because it's not like plants are going to stop growing in that area. And unfortunately, we have a serious invasive plant issue in Placer County. We have 2 broom species, French broom and Scotch broom, that are not fire friendly, and they move in and create dense stands of vegetation that eventually become woody, that eventually die, and become pretty much a worse problem than what you may have begun with, believe it or not. Removing all the toyon and manzanita and any type of shrubby understory plants, you're going to lose wildlife habitat. And if we do this in a large scale, it can truly impact our wildlife habitat in large swaths of our county. And so now, I'm not saying that you wouldn't remove a shrub that's up against a tree to get rid of those fire ladders. But removing a shrub that is not part of a fire ladder is almost, not only doesn't need to be done, but it actually can be harmful to our environment. Now, another problem that I see in my area where I live up in the Eden Valley area between Meadow Vista and Colfax, is soil erosion. And so after a lot of clearing occurs, about this time of year, once we get a soaking rain, people start hiring folks to come in and do some defensible space work. And when that's done, it usually leads to a whole bunch of area that suddenly is exposed. And so soil erosion becomes a real true concern because we get a heavy rainfall and we don't have that tree canopy and the shrub beneath it and covered soil. And so all of a sudden you start getting soil moving off your property onto other people's property, into our streams, into our lakes, all into our rivers, things like that. Finally, just the whole idea of taking out young trees means that we have many, many properties now that are just solely made up of mature trees with nothing coming up behind them. And so as those mature trees live out their life and die, we could potentially have plenty of areas where there's no new trees growing. And even though you may think instinctively, oh, that's a good thing, too many trees. Well, there are too many trees in certain areas of our forests. But from the most part, oak woodlands and even our mixed conifer environments where I live in kind of the 2,000 to 3,000 foot elevation range are rarely too dense to be needing extreme clearing out to just mature trees. So there's a middle ground here, okay, absolutely. And we need to find that a little bit better than just wholesale clearing. Okay, so let's move on to an interesting question that I get all the time, and that is, are there Firewise plants? Because many, many people are totally fine going away from the traditional landscape, like I talked about at the beginning, the foundational plantings and everything hedged into squares and circles and things. But they don't want a garden that's just rock, right? They don't necessarily want a garden made up of just succulents. So how do we have our cake and eat it too? How do we have a pretty landscape, but also make it Firewise, right? And so the University of California has started to remove a lot of the lists of Firewise plants that have been on websites for years upon years. And the reason why is, number one, there's no research that really supports them. If you start looking at these Firewise plant lists, what you notice is that the references are circular. They refer to each other over and over again. And so there's not a lot of good research on saying this palette of plants will slow a fire greater than this palette of plants, okay? I think there is research that's coming that's going to help us make better choices for plants. But right now, by and large, the key is maintaining plants and spacing them appropriately. So the right plant for the right place and then maintaining it appropriately is way more important than the plant type specifically. Now, there is data on plants that are super flammable, right? So we do know of plants that do not make good choices for that, 5 to 30 foot zone 1. So like an example, I'm gonna share some, but like juniper, for example, is a highly flammable shrub that traditionally people have all around their house. Those need to be removed, okay? A common native plant like incense cedar, a tree, highly flammable. We know that. And so in that fuel reduction zone, let's make sure we have absolutely no fire ladders around incense cedars. And maybe we thin incense cedars a little bit heavier than we would other species, especially oaks, right? So are there Firewise plants? Basically, the answer is yes, in the sense that you want to avoid highly flammable plants. If you're going to plant all sorts of other plants, then the key is maintaining them in the proper way. So let's look at some specific examples to really, take this home. So lavender is such a great example because you can see on many Firewise plant lists that good old lavender's on there. And, I have a lot of people say, well, doesn't lavender have a bunch of oils in there? And well, yes, but when it's young, it tends to be pretty lush, very green, very low growing. And it's kind of a great option for that 5 to 30 foot area of zone 1. You could have lavender plants in islands and give them, horizontal and vertical space and enjoy their beauty, right? But the problem is, as lavender matures, it goes from an herbaceous perennial to a woody perennial with a ton of dead material within. And so, you really have to either make a choice at this point as it matures. You either are on top of it and thin that mature lavender out to try and prune it in a way to create new lush growth. So pruning, gives the plant a growth response. Okay. And so by selective pruning and pruning in the right way, you can recreate that initial kind of lush growth in a lavender plant. However, it also may be the situation where at a certain point, that mature plant is removed from the landscape and a new baby plant is replaces it to maintain that kind of Firewise environment. So this is one great example of the same plant in the course of its life going from Firewise to fire hazard, okay? And there's many, many cases of that. So that's why I don't love the idea of people picking plants and thinking that's all I have to do is just put in Firewise plants and I'm good. So hedges, I've already said this a couple of times in the presentation that one of the worst things we can have around our house is hedged plants, because many, many plants can survive as hedges. However, as far as fire goes, they create a structure that isn't conducive to fire resilience. The boxwood is probably the most famous plant to be created into a hedge. In Disneyland, there's like Mickey Mouse heads that are, boxwood hedges. And it's like very traditional to have boxwoods around your houses that are hedged. And so on the left here, you see the natural form of the plant, right? Very lush, dense, lush growth. Very easy to see a dead part pop out in there and to go in and prune it out. And so, in that case, those look pretty good for that 5 to 30 foot zone, that lean, green, and clean zone. However, once you start hedging a boxwood and you only allow new growth on the outside 2 to 3 inches, everything internally that does not get light dies. And so you end up with basically a plant from the outside that looks green, but kindling inside. And so you can imagine if you had those around your home and you had embers fall into the middle of that, that is going to catch fire and create a flame that is hot and long quickly. Okay, so this doesn't just apply to boxwoods, even though that's the most prominent one. Anything that you have hedged around your home, take a look at it. Go over and spread apart the green growth on the outside and peer into the inside of that hedge. My guess is there's going to be a lot of dead vegetation there. And so there's a way to kind of convert those hedges back into natural forms. But like I said, the other choice in some cases is to remove that hedge. You could even replant the same species, but you maintain it in a completely different way. And so again, this is kind of retraining our landscapers and our people who take care of their own landscapes at home to think of maintenance in a different way than we did traditionally with some of these plants. Another great example, okay, so many people think, well, if I plant California natives, I'm safe, right? And we deal with this a lot of times with drought tolerant landscapes. People say, well, if I plant native plants that are native to this area, I don't have to worry about watering them during the summer because they don't get water. Well, of course, there's a whole palette of native plants that are existing along streams and are riparian species and that rely on water. And so that is a blanket. The idea that all native plants are drought tolerant is just simply a myth, right? The idea that all native plants are appropriate Firewise plants, also a myth. And so on many Firewise plant lists, you will see our good old, beautiful native tree shrub, the California buckeye, right? And I have a lot of gardeners that just love this tree. I love this tree. I love how you can make it into kind of a bush or have it in kind of a tree form. And it's got these beautiful spring growth, beautiful leaves and beautiful flowers. But the problem is that in the Firewise plant list, it doesn't say that it actually dies back at the height of fire season. So, a couple weeks ago, at the height of fire season, when things are really starting to get dry and we usually have a lot of wind events at this time, guess what? The California buckeye is full of dead material. Okay, it goes dormant, summer dormant, late summer dormant. All the foliage dies back. And if you had a bunch of these around your house, they would be Firewise until they were not. Okay, so this is another great example of something that you'll find on Firewise plant lists that, in my opinion, in this area is not something you even want in that 5 to 30 foot range around your house, because you cannot go out there and strip every single dead leaf from these larger California buckeyes. That would be very difficult to do. And so these are the types of things that we need to think about, not just the initial characteristics of a plant, but what does the plant do as it gets mature? What does the plant do seasonally, right? So see how we can't rely on these lists to really give the full picture. So that's why I think maintenance has to be the focus and placement. Here's a great example of some junipers around a house, around a little duplex here. And you can see nothing around it is on fire, right? Only those shrubs. So I'm not sure of the backstory here, but it just goes to show that, embers can fly in from far away if you have highly flammable plants right up against your home, and can give you almost zero time to deal with the situation. So this can happen so fast, especially with these shrubs like junipers, that they, in my opinion, are full removals, keeping that 0 to 5 feet clear. And I wouldn't even place what we know of as highly flammable plants in the defensible space zone all the way out, even to 100 feet. The data gets really thin as far as that 30 foot to 100 foot zone. I'm not saying that it's not important to reduce fuel in that zone to have spacing, but really, really focus on that 0 to 5 and 5 to 30. Okay. All right, so let's talk quickly. Let's see how I'm doing on time. I have a couple more minutes here. So let's talk about mulch, because again, this is one of those kind of competing narratives, right? We're in a drought situation, and what do we as master gardeners tell everyone to do? Mulch, 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 mulch. Keep that moisture in the soil. Keep down weeds from growing that use up water and nutrients, right? And improve soil's ability to hold water over time through the use of mulch. So mulch is a wonderful thing, and we talk about it like crazy, and we encourage everyone to use organic mulches. And guess what? We have to be super careful about that in our defensible space zones. There have been some great studies on the flammability of mulch materials. So that's what's great, is we have data here, okay? And so the number one thing, the most popular organic mulch used in landscapes is shredded material, shredded redwood, gorilla hair, some people call it, shredded bark, shredded material. And guess what? It's the most highly flammable of the organic mulches. So anywhere in that, 0 to even 100 feet all the way out, no shredded stuff. It catches fire and then it can blow in the wind even, and make matters really bad really fast. So there are organic mulches that actually have pretty good resistance to flammability, that kind of smolder instead of have large flame length. And so I encourage people to go use a search engine of your choice and look into, you know, the flammability of mulch. And there's a number of studies. There was one done at the University of Reno that's really well done. And what it showed was that a composted wood chip mulch is actually a really great organic mulch choice, even in our defensible space zones, not the 0 to 5, but beyond that. And so when you have like a lot of these arborists who are chipping material into the back of trucks, there's a mix of species, there's a mix of dead and green material, there's a mix of moisture. And so what happens in the back of those trucks is they start composting. And so arborist wood chips are a wonderful choice for organic mulches. So it's not that you cannot use mulch, that you have to use the right ones, and you really don't want to keep it thicker than 2 to 3 inches. That's the other thing. So if you have planting islands, clusters of plants, use mulch in those, but not outside of them. A great resource for folks is the readyforwildfire.org site. This is the one-stop shop, and they have a lot of graphical representations, a ton of information, and it's really where, as much as I want to steer people to my own Master Gardener websites and local sites, this site is the one-stop shop, and I'm always funneling people here if they have questions. So an amazing resource for us, and there's so much information on this site that I don't think you could really exhaust it, to be honest with you. And finally, to kind of wrap up, a couple years ago, or I should say a year ago, we did a little webinar in conjunction with the Auburn Fire Department and the Maidu Station and the Placer County Water Agency. This is up on their website, and you can go check it out. You can kind of get an idea of how you transition a landscape from a more traditional landscape to a more Firewise, water-wise landscape. And there's actual plant lists that were used in this specific landscape on this site as well. And of course, just drive by the station and check it out. And watch it grow, watch it evolve, watch the maintenance being done. So that's another resource for you. I have my email address and my phone number on the first slide of this presentation. So everyone has that as well. Please feel free to reach out to me or my Master Gardener programs. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope this helps people develop a more Firewise landscape. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, Kevin. This is the second time you've spoken to the Fire Safe Council, and it's always very informative and entertaining presentation. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
There are a couple of questions. We are getting into kind of the fall and winter months now. What type of things can homeowners do at this part of the year to make their properties more fire safe?
It's a good question, because a lot of Placer County residents live amongst oak trees, right? And so we love our oak trees, but pruning them is not something that they like. Okay, so whenever you prune something, you create a wound. When you create a wound, that opens the door to potential fungal or bacterial pathogens. And so oaks especially, we want to be very careful with pruning during the times right now, during the summer months, where they are drought stressed and water stressed. So moving into the fall is your opportunity. Once the deciduous oaks lose their leaves, and even our interior live oaks and canyon live oaks that are evergreen, you're going to want to do pruning during this dormant time. So moving into late fall, winter, that's when you want to do your oak pruning maintenance, which is crucial, because a lot of times those are trees that are hanging over people's roofs, right? They're beautiful, but they need large cuts, and they don't like that very much. So you want to do it at the right time of year. The other things you can do, of course, is a lot of people are clear and then do burning, right? Burn vegetation. Well, we don't have the opportunity to do that for 8 months, 9 months out of the year. So moving into the fall, winter, once we get soaking rains and once our fire department say it's okay to do, then that's the time to go out and get some of that dead material, either have it chipped up and use it as mulch, or go ahead and burn dry material. So that's the other thing you could do. So, and really I said oak specifically, but really that relates to all trees. So most tree pruning should be done, large cuts should be done in the dormant time. And then of course, fall is the best time to plant, okay? So right now, if you're thinking about removing plants, you can also right now have the perfect time to replant. So when the soil is still a bit warm, but yet, we're getting cooler days and cooler nights. Fall is the perfect time to plant perennial shrubs, trees. So I think all those things together make fall going into winter a great time to be outside in your yards.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Another question, if you could talk a little bit about the Master Gardener program and how the Master Gardeners can help homeowners design Firewise landscapes.
The Master Gardener program is basically a volunteer program where volunteers are trained, extensively trained. The training goes for 4 months with a 4-hour class every week in that whole time span. So it's not just a little training, it's a lot of training. But they're an educational group. So research-based education and information. They do not come to your house. So that's the kind of limiting factor with the Master Gardener volunteers. They're not allowed to do private home site visits. And so they can help you with your garden stuff, but they can't come out to your house. And a lot of people say, oh, can they come out and help me in my garden or prune my fruit trees or this or that? No, they don't do that. But you can visit them, you can email them, you can call them, you can visit them at local events, talk to them there, and they have a ton of information about all these things I've been talking about. Right plant for the right place, how to maintain them appropriately, and kind of the best plants for the different areas in Placer County.
Great, thank you. Thanks again, Kevin. I am going to share my screen here one last time. Our next educational forum will be held on Friday, November 11th at noon. Our speaker will be Dave Atkinson, Director of the Placer County Office of Emergency Services, and his topic will be disaster preparedness, and he'll talk about the mosquito fire as well. You can stay in touch with the Firewise Council online or by email or through our Facebook site, both of which are listed here on the screen. If you request to be added to our mailing list, you'll receive notification of upcoming events and meetings and stay updated on what the council is doing. Additionally, we meet on the third Friday of the month at 9 a.m. The meetings are held at the Auburn City Hall, but are also broadcast over Zoom as well. Again, thank you for your time, everyone, and enjoy your rest of the day, and we'll close out the webinar now.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.